Let's get the very latest from MS Now contributor Inzamam Rashid in Dubai, MS Now White House reporter Akayla Gardner, and also with us, political science professor at the University of Chicago, Robert Pape. He is the author of the Escalation Trap Substack, and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense Dana Stroll. So, Akayla, what did we hear from the Pentagon on this blockade as the fighting remains paused?
Yeah, we are now on day 3 of this blockade after those failed peace talks over the weekend between the U.S. and Iran. And this blockade is really designed to prevent ships from leaving Iran or going to Iran, and particularly oil shipments. And we had an update today from General Dan Kane really describing the mechanics of how this blockade is working. I want you to take a listen to him.
This blockade applies to all ships, regardless of nationality, heading into or from Iranian ports. Any ship that would cross the blockade would result in our sailors executing pre-planned tactics designed to bring the force to that ship, if need be, board the ship. We are also conducting similar maritime interdiction actions and activities in the Pacific AOR against those ships that left that area before we began the blockade.
Now, he said today 13 ships have been turned around as a result of these U.S. threats to either board the ship or use force against them. He also says more than 10,000 sailors, Marines, and airmen are a part of this mission. And you heard from Hegseth basically saying if Iran does not come to a deal with the U.S., they will continue this blockade or threatening more attacks on infrastructure in Iran.
Dana, you write in the Los Angeles Times that Trump's remaining military options are grim. Does this blockade give him more options? What's your reaction to what we heard this morning?
Well, I think the challenge here is how long it's going to take for the economic pain on Iran of this blockade versus how much the rest of the global system and other economies that are dependent on energy exports from the Middle East, whether they be from Gulf states or Iran, versus pain here in America on the price of gasoline, and finally, the sustainability of this naval mission over time. So it's been a couple of days. So far, the Iranians haven't challenged the blockade, but the amount of intelligence resources, assets, both air and naval, that it will take to enforce this over a long period of time will make the trade-offs and the pain points more stark between Trump and the Iranian regime.
Inzamam, you have reporting that Iran and Pakistan are actively talking. What are the expectations around a U.S. return to the negotiating table?
Well, Anna, look, we've got 6 days left, right, of this initial ceasefire, the 2-week ceasefire that was implemented. And so as a result of that, you see that the US and Iran want to get back in the room together to have conversations. I think they're quite desperate for that. In fact, Pakistan want that to happen as well, not least because they want to be the country that essentially brought peace to the region, but also because their own people are suffering as a result of this war economically every single night. Every day, Pakistani people are turning off their lights early because they have to in order to save fuel and electricity. But look, there are huge splits that remain between the US and Iran right now. And this is a real problem. And this is why they haven't been in the negotiation room a lot sooner than since the weekend when Vice President J.D. Vance was there 21 hours talking with the Iranians, with the Pakistanis there as well. What we do know is that the Pakistani army chief was essentially dispatched to Tehran by President Trump, along with some messages from the US to try and pull back some of those sticking points that are a real issue between the US and Iran right now. And with some of my conversations that I've had with very senior members of the Pakistani government, those who are actually involved in the talks at the weekend, they've suggested to me that there could be some concessions by Iran on the issue of uranium and the nuclear issue. Essentially, we can see on the screen a couple of lists of those red lines, those sticking points on both sides. And I'll just name a couple of them. Uranium enrichment is one of them. The US want to see Iran pause any development of that for around 20 years or so. In response, Iran have said they want the right to enrich uranium and have suggested that they'll pause for up to 5 years. We've also got on there that the US has said to Iran, you shouldn't be funding your proxies like Hamas, Hezbollah and the Houthis, and also to open up fully the Strait of Hormuz without any tolls. And in response, Iran have said, well, look, we want all sanctions lifted, the billions of dollars unfrozen and back to us, and that we want some management of the Strait of Hormuz. You can just clearly see there that there are some huge differences, many of them completely opposite, and that's why it's proving difficult maybe right now to get the two countries in the same room. But Pakistan seem hopeful that it could potentially happen next week, Anna.
Robert, you argue in the New York Times that Iran is now a major global power thanks to its leverage over the Strait of Hormuz, which could extend well into the future. And you sum it up like this. Protecting each and every oil shipment that passes through the Strait of Hormuz is a full-time operation. It requires continuous military presence. Iran needs only to hit an oil tanker once in a while to cast doubt on the reliability of the world's oil shipments. So I want to get your reaction to what Secretary Hegseth said. Listen.
You like to say publicly, Iran, that you control the Strait of Hormuz, but you don't have a navy or real domain awareness. You can't control anything. To be clear, threatening to shoot missiles and drones at ships, commercial ships that are lawfully transiting international waters, that is not control. That's piracy.
Robert, what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, so to be clear, in the New York Times op-ed, I explained we're at a fork in the road. Either if we pull back, Iran will become an emerging, underscore emerging, fourth center of world power. The other choice is escalation. And what you're seeing is the Trump administration is choosing escalation. They've gone from air power to a naval blockade. So that's their solution. They're going to a naval blockade. And that blockade, I've studied blockades, oil sanctions for 30 years. This will take months, if not years, and maybe never to get Iran to surrender its weapons of mass destruction, its uranium. With Iraq in the 1990s, we had oil sanctions on Iraq for over 13 years. And that was crippling for its economy, 48%. We shrunk its economy by 48% over 13 years. This is bigger than Iran. Iran's oil is only about 20% of its economy. And Saddam Hussein never really relinquished what we needed. That's why we started the ground war. What you are seeing here is that we're going down the road of escalation, and I don't think we're going to wait 13 years because for any ground operations. You already hear that in Secretary Hegseth when he says, you give us the uranium or else. Well, that or else is ground operations. Now, yes, we might do more bombing, we might do more X, Y, or Z, but ultimately, you want that uranium, you're going to have to go in on the ground to make sure you got it all. That's what happened with Saddam Hussein, and that's just the reality here. And so we are heading to a path of escalation. The other choice is you let Iran become the fourth center of world power.
And now that Iran has had a taste of this power, given its leverage it's been able to have with the Strait, what do you think it would take, Robert, for them to give it up, to give up that sense of power?
We've really rarely in the last 300 years, Anna, seen a country surrender world power. And the one case where they did that, their leaders deeply regretted it, and that's with the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union. So there is a case where Gorbachev basically bought what the West was saying, that if he would surrender Eastern Europe, all would open up. The entire economic world of the West would suddenly become in Russia. What happened in the 90s is Russia lost 80% of its GDP, literally 80%. So all these promises, these really meaningless here. And so it's just very unlikely Iran will take the sucker deal, because states rarely do that. And the one time they did, now you see Putin, and it's not just Putin, all the leaders of Russia want to take it back. This is just highly unlikely here. This is just wishful thinking. We are heading down a road of escalation, either that or Iran becomes the fourth center of world power.
Dana Inzamam laid out some of the demands from both sides, the U.S. and Iran, as they, had this negotiation previously, hoping to return to the negotiating table. Iran wants the U.S. to drop sanctions. But then yesterday, Treasury Secretary Bessent threatened to push secondary sanctions on any country that buys Iranian oil. And Washington's 30-day waiver of Iran oil sanctions expires Sunday. This sort of threat didn't stop Russia in Ukraine. Will it work in this U.S. war with Iran?
Well, I think what's interesting about this moment in time is that the Iranians, despite the fact that the regime has survived and they've found this extra pillar of leverage, first it was the nuclear program, the ballistic missile program, and the support for terrorism. And over the course of this war, they've hijacked the Strait of Hormuz and international shipping. But the reality is there was sort of a breakthrough in the talks last weekend, which is that apparently Vice President Vance said that the United States wants a moratorium on nuclear enrichment for 20 years. The Iranians countered with 5 years. This means that the big concession of a complete ban on uranium enrichment is something that the Trump administration has taken off the table, and we're now actually negotiating only about the period of time. What the United States apparently isn't insisting on, based on what everyone understands happened in the talks last weekend and what the potential next round could entail, is nothing about ballistic missiles, nothing about support for terrorism. So if the Iranians get some sort of time period under which they shouldn't enrich uranium, they're able to negotiate something about the disposition of that enriched uranium stockpile that still exists in Iran, and they have to give up or allow some amount of freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. But everyone understands that it's one drone attack or one anti-ship ballistic missile away from them instituting terrorism in this critical choke point. And for those two things, they get sanctions relief. It's not a bad day for Tehran.